I don't have a very strong opinion on 3D films at the moment. I wouldn't go and see a film that had been previously released as normal and then converted to 3D. And the 3D films I've seen myself, I've not been that impressed with. The golden era of 3D films of the 1950s is a brief period of around 51 to 55, and it was mainly came about as a reaction against the increasing popularity of television in America, principally, and the film industry was losing a great deal of money with box office receipts were down, and they had to come up with ways of making films appear fresh and new. So they came up with a number of inventions, things like widescreen, and colour film became much cheaper, and you got different processors like CinemaScope coming in, and 3D was one of those technological advances that was intended to bring people back to the cinema, and it was briefly successful for a while. There were a handful of films that now wouldn't be considered classic films, but then, historically speaking, they are. I think it was a gimmick in the 50s. It was a gimmick that people, particularly young people, because that's what it was aimed at. And I think there's only so many films you can see where somebody's playing ping pong and firing the ball towards the camera, which is basically the kind of tricks that they use in these films. I think they've got to have a really good storyline to continue to be attractive to an audience. And like any kind of gimmick, it was short-lived. After 2 or 3 years, people wanted something different, and people were getting more and more interested in watching TV and not going out of an evening. I think cinemas coped well enough in the 1950s with the introduction of 3D. You had other things that were involved in terms of sound, so you had stereo sound being introduced, and cinemas had to, if you like, upgrade their equipment to improve the sound quality. But visually, it wasn't, you know, the screen remained the same, the projector did. It's more about the huge plastic glasses that people had to wear. But I think that if 3D had taken off and been a massive success, then cinemas would have continued to cope with them and would have upgraded, you know, as they needed to, if you like. But it was a short-lived phase or gimmick. The best film of the 50s golden era of 3D is House of Wax, by a long way. I mean, it's nowadays it's not particularly frightening, but the colour was fantastic, and it's got a great final scene with lots of flames, buildings burning down, the villain with a wax face melting, making everyone scream. No one would scream now, of course, but House of Wax is the best 1950s 3D film. In terms of technology, I don't think 3D films have reached, if you like, their best peak at all. The 50s films were, I suppose, quite primitive in terms of the technology. I don't think at the moment, personally, the last 3D film I went to see was 18 months ago, and I think it was Toy Story 3, and I wasn't that impressed at all with the 3D effect of it. I thought it was quite distracting. So I think technologically they have some way to go yet to make the viewing experience really stand out and really impressive. I don't think at the moment they're quite there with 3D. So the classic or golden period of modern 3D is still to come. I would say that 3D has clearly improved certainly since the 50s, since the golden period. I mean, it's got to be better 60 years later. It's still not good enough, I don't think, but it's certainly improved. I don't think the golden era of the past in the 50s has had much of an effect at all on present cinema audiences or present cinema. Again, in the 50s it was a gimmick to pull people back to the cinemas. It's just the same now. The introduction and the popularity of 3D and making films in 3D is another gimmick that's an attempt to bring out an audience to the cinema, because Hollywood's in trouble again. It's in trouble every few years, but at the moment people are watching film in different ways, whether they're downloading them, whatever technological format they're using. It's not the same as going to the cinema, and cinema ticket sales have fallen dramatically. So 3D has been forced onto Hollywood, if you like. It's another way of trying to attract an audience. So I don't think people thought, oh, let's do what they did in the 50s. I think people just looked at what kind of gimmicks are possible to add to a film and to bring a new audience in. And it's been, to a degree, very successful. You've only got to look at Titanic. It's very cheap to convert a film to 3D. I think it costs something like, for Titanic they spent, I think it was about $250,000, about $250,000 to convert the entire film to 3D. So if that's your investment in a film that's already shot and has already been a success, and you only have to spend that much to put it back in cinemas, you can't fail to make a profit. And Titanic's been a huge success again, however long it's been, 15 years after it was made, to coincide with the 100th anniversary. But Titanic wasn't shot in 3D, or with 3D in mind, so surely a cinema experience can't be that much different from when it was 15 years ago. But in terms of attaching the words 3D to it, and it's a new experience, it's worked as a marketing tool. It's worked extremely well. I do think the present phase for 3D films and the popularity of them, or relative popularity of them, I'm afraid, unless the technology becomes hugely more advanced in terms of the glasses or how you view the 3D film, I think it is going to be a short-lived phase that's going to last a short number of years, unless they can get the technology to be hugely improved.